on to task 1.9, Intercom. So we're told to enable intercom functionality between Jack's phone and Hugo's phone using the DNs of 1001 and 1002 respectively for intercom. Okay? Each phone's intercom line should go off hook with speaker immediately, no ringing. Each person should be able to see ringing ID or display ID of the other person's full name when calling or being called, respectively. And if either person goes off hook on their intercom line, it should automatically dial the other person's intercom phone line, and their phone display should indicate that. All right? Nothing too terribly difficult. So let's switch over and take a look at intercom functionality on a given phone. Now, first of all, for Jack and Hugo's phone, corporate headquarter phone 2 and 1, we would need to make sure that we have a phone button template that has at least intercom functionality on it, which we see that we already do, or we could go do modify buttons and add that functionality, or go modify the template for everyone. So we'll add an intercom line, and we were currently on 1002, so we'll make this 1002. Now, note that this has a partition, but wait a minute, there are no partitions. How's that possible? There are plenty of partitions in this system. They were already here when we started. Okay, if that's the case, why is there no partitions for intercom? Because intercom is actually a special entity that has its own partitions and calling search spaces and directory numbers. They're separate from the rest of the functionality of the system. Separate from the rest of the calling search spaces, rest of the partitions, rest of the DNs. So I can go create an intercom route partition, which we actually have none. And I'll just call it INT-PT for intercom partition. Phones. We'll save this, and we'll go up and create intercom calling search space. Now, do we need to create one? Actually, whenever we create a intercom partition, a intercom calling search space automatically is generated. GEN for generated. And it automatically contains the partition we just created. So the CSS was created for us, essentially. Now let's go back to DN 1002, corporate headquarter phone 2, Hugo, and add an intercom DN that we were told was supposed to have the DN of his normal line. But again, because this is in a different partition, actually a special partition called intercom partitions, it doesn't overlap. Now remember that we were told to allow each person to see the ringing ID or display ID, depending on whether the call was being calling or called, respectively. So remember the alerting name and the caller display ID. Okay, so alerting was if someone is calling us, we are the ringing or going off hook intercom. That's going to be our alerting name, sending back to the original calling party. And display, caller ID, this is going to be my number. If I'm calling someone else, they're seeing who is calling. Okay? So one way, the other way that we demonstrated back in the original task. So this was Hugo Reyes, and also Hugo Reyes. Oops. Now, if you don't key it in properly the first time, it doesn't automatically copy down to the, well, what you key in the first time copies down to your ASCII display. And then maybe I want a line text label saying Hugo Reyes Intercom, but actually, wait a minute, do I want this to say my own name Intercom? Remember, we were told also to make sure that if either person goes off hook on their intercom, it should automatically dial the other person's intercom. And their phone display should indicate that if they go off hook, that's what would happen. So the phone display might be this line text label of Jack Shepard, maybe let's say something like Intercom, Jack Shepard. And then the speed dial field here is going to be 1001, if I can key it in properly. External phone number mask, I really don't care about that. Okay, so speed dial, what calling search space is it going to use? Good question. What calling search space? Well, as long as we put Jack's auto answer for 1001 that we'll create in a little bit in the same internal PT or intercom PT or partition for phones, then this CSS will get there properly. Okay, so again, we have to put in a calling search space so that whenever we go off hook on our intercom, we can dial someone within this CSS. We don't have to. Notice the omission or lack of a little asterisk, which is required field. That, well, yeah, shows up down here. Speed dial is not a required field, so I don't have to have a speed dial. That way I can go off hook on my intercom line and dial anyone else's intercom, provided that that's the functionality I'm allowed. I might have a speed dial specific. That way every time I go off on the line, it's just like PLAR. It's just like a speed dial. I press it, and it automatically uses the CSS to try and dial that other person's intercom. Also, remember that we were supposed to see information regarding the other person's full name. So we do have caller name, and then also ringing ID, so maybe the phone number as well. So calling or caller number. Okay, so we're pretty much enabling every feature on this page, but the idea is that we want to talk about it. The only thing we're not really talking about is presence group, which we will talk about when we get to presence. We don't really need an external phone number mask because we're not going to dial outside the system. Okay, so the only other thing that happened when we clicked update was we see that we are allowed control from the CTI device and that we're associated to a device. So now, we go back to configure device, phone. We see that we've got this intercom line. So let's go back to our list of phones and grab corporate headquarter phone 1 and do the same thing. Add a new intercom, 1001. In the route partition of intercom partition, page refreshes every time. Once I put a DN in, it refreshes to see if it's an overlapping DN with any others in the already assigned partition, which was none. And then once I change this to a specific partition, it refreshes again. It's not using AJAX, which would be nice, so the whole page wouldn't have to refresh. But it's essentially performing JavaScript or a SQL stored procedure just to make sure it's not an overlapping DN. Okay, so alerting name is going to be Jack Shepard. Calling search space to call over to Hugo is going to be intercom partition phones generated. Okay, maybe not named well enough with CSS, but it certainly gets the job done. It was auto-created or auto-generated. Display, again, Jack Shepard. Line text is going to be intercom to Hugo Reyes. And the speed dial over to 1002. And we'll present the calling number or caller number as well. Back to our phone. And let's actually go check out our phones. Okay, so they have begun refreshing. Hugo's back up first. Bring Jack's back up. Okay, so now I've got an intercom line on each. If I go off hook on this line, instantly connects. I'll go mute on these. Instantly connects over to the other phone. Note that I see Hugo Reyes next to the intercom. So in other words, if I only had intercom showing up here and it wasn't also a speed dial, as I had pressed the intercom and dialed someone, I would see the calling name, or rather the call-ed name, next to my intercom line that will now disappear. Okay, and vice versa works as well. See that